And then Israel will find an excuse, a pretext. It's not hard to fabricate pretext. Or it will simply say Hamas hasn't disarmed. Israel will not let go of this opportunity. It's a 70%.
Wow.
Say there are no innocents in Gaza from
Wow.
age 0 on up.
Norman Finkelstein just revealed why Trump's plan for Gaza is doomed to fail, despite the fact that it seems like Hamas is willing to accept some of the stipulations. And in this clip, he discusses why this problem runs far deeper than Netanyahu himself and what Israel is guaranteed to do to take advantage of the situation. So let's watch this. He is a scholar and has dedicated a lifetime to expertise in this field. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
U.S. President Donald Trump this week released what he calls a Gaza ceasefire plan. The thing about the proposal, though, is that it was drafted without any participation from Hamas. There's no seeming pathway to Palestinian statehood. And it sets in place a board of peace that's chaired by Donald Trump to govern Gaza. How should we see this plan in terms of its credibility?
I think there are several things to be said. First of all, I do believe a historical context is important. Since Jimmy Carter, we're talking about the mid-1970s, every U.S. president, with the exceptions of Biden and Obama, every U.S. president has presented a Middle East peace plan that's supposed to bring chief peace between Israel and the Palestinians. Now, the Trump so-called plan, I would say of all the plans, it's by a wide margin the flimsiest, just as a factual matter. There's no reference to any documents. All the other ones will make reference to 242 and 338 and UN resolution this or that, or some sort of international. Here it's nothing. It's just 20, it's literally just 20 points. There's no reference, no elaboration, no coherence, no nothing. There's only one deadline in the 20 points. There's one deadline. Hamas has 72 hours to accept it, or Trump is going to give the green light to decimate Gaza. Not it's not already being decimated, but he'll give the green light.
Yeah, this is right. Actually, there was an initial 21st point that was supposed to serve as justification for the Israeli occupation of the West Bank, but he's right about this plan. Take a look on it. Don't take it from me or Finkelstein. Look at this list of points. It's a lot of ambiguous language and abstract language that, depending on how you interpret it, could mean one thing or the other, and it's not really concrete in what it is. Now, there's several stipulations that would involve the U.S. more than what it is now, and that's what scares me the most. Trump on the board of this peacekeeping force that opens the ground for U.S. boots there, that is terrifying to me. And also developmental projects to be headed with Jared Kushner and Tony Blair, turning Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East. It's just so absurd. But there are so many things here that could open the door to increased U.S. involvement rather than decreased U.S. involvement, which is what I want. That is what America first should be.
Apart from that, it seems to me that apart from that one deadline, I think it's a non-starter. Nothing is going to happen. So if you look closely at the things it says, forget about the issue of statehood. There's no context of statehood. But there is an issue of a genocide right now, in the here and now. So what does it say? First of all, it says that Israel will be able to decide whether or not to withdraw based on whether or not Hamas has been disarmed. If you look at point 16, if you have it in front of you, point 16 is very clear. Israel doesn't have to move an inch if it's, in its opinion, Hamas has not disarmed. Well, how do you prove Hamas is disarmed? Is there any way to prove that? So all Israel has to say is Hamas hasn't disarmed. Now, there are parts of the agreement which, in theory, sound wonderful, like UN organizations will have clearance to go in and would have to will have to have as a minimum the amount of aid that was admitted with the ceasefire that began January 17th of this year. But then they have a provision. It's very subtle. It says UN organizations which are not partial to either side. Well, there goes UNRWA, because you already know UNRWA is a Hamas organization. That's what Israel has been saying.
Yeah. Because
Yeah, this seems to give Israel all the power in adjudicating or determining, being the final arbiter of what constitutes demilitarization and giving up arms. They're insisting that Hamas give up arms, but then it's under their control, their complete influence as to judging that fact. It's not a neutral arbiter, and by the way, the U.S. is no neutral arbiter in this conversation either, having bankrolled this genocide and bankrolled Israel to the tune of $300 billion. And that gives all the power to the Israelis to determine that Hamas hasn't disarmed. If one single member of, the 13,000 or so Hamas soldiers remain, they can say, hey, they haven't disarmed, and we're going to continue this military occupation. And by the way, let's annex Gaza and let's continue those plans that have been laid out by Netanyahu. That is true. As far as the UN aid, indeed, I'm not a big fan of the UN, but it's better to have more aid flowing through to Gaza. I think ultimately, this should be totally opened up. There should be no aid blockade unless Israel, you want to, believe that Smotrich's word is carrying the day, that he actually wants starvation in Gaza. And if you don't believe me on that, you can read what Smotrich has said about this. He said he wants starvation in Gaza, but it'd be too politically incorrect to sell it like that. So yeah, these are both concerns.
Based on the Israeli narrative, the UN itself is not an impartial institution, right? So who is an impartial institution?
I know. Well, it says has to be agreeable. It has to be impartial, neither supporting one side or another. Well, that leaves all the UN organizations out. I think the bottom line is maybe Hamas will agree and give up the hostages. It's possible. I can't predict that sort of thing. Doesn't make any difference. First of all, Israel doesn't want Hamas to give up the hostages. That's just a factual matter. Because the hostages has done well in terms of PR, because people abroad have no idea what's going on. So they said, well, why doesn't Hamas just free the hostages? That's all they have to do. But as a practical issue, it makes no difference at all. Because October 7th, it was a crisis for Israel, no question about that. Nobody should pretend as if Israel was behind it, a false flag. It was a real crisis.
Okay, a few things here. First of all, I totally agree with him that Netanyahu doesn't want the hostages released. They serve as a propaganda tool that he uses, and he cites on and on and on, let my people go, to justify the atrocities in Gaza. Now, Hamas has always been willing to give up hostages. They were doing that in the first ceasefire until Netanyahu was the one that violated the ceasefire and didn't allow the remaining hostages to transition to Israel. And by the way, Israel holds about 3,500 Palestinian hostages in the context of this war, which is, again, actually a genocide, with secret evidence against them, but no trials. So yeah, this is a propaganda tool to allow for the Greater Israel Project to support the bombing of Israel's Arabian neighbors. Now, as far as October 7th being a false flag, there's a lot of information that if not a false flag, it was at least Mossad looking the other way. Egypt tipped off the Israeli government to that attack 3 days in advance, and major newspaper articles have been written, both in Israel and the United States, that Mossad knew about this kind of attack a year in advance and didn't stop it. And why, you might ask? Well, Netanyahu was about to go down for fraud and corruption just before this. His career would have been ruined. But this seems to have bailed him out, I'm sorry to say. And they're still holding those charges against him. They've been delayed in many cases. But, this is one of the reasons they're acting so erratically, is that Netanyahu would go down for the vile criminality that he's engaged with outside of this.
And it was, for them, a real calamity, no question about it. But people in power are very cynical, as you, of course, know. And there are a few salty tears shed, and then they rub their hands, the palms of their hands in anticipation. What can we get out of it? And for Israel, this was a godsend. This was a godsend, October 7th. It wasn't just an opportunity. You know, the cliche, every crisis is an opportunity. It was a godsend.
Yeah, totally agree with this. This is a point that I hammered down on in my videos. It's like that Rahm Emanuel statement, never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, this is what Israel's doing. It's the same thing that my criminal government did after 9/11 when, hey, we got the Patriot Act, and hey, here's the TSA to put their hands down your pants at the airports, and here's the Patriot Act to curtail your civil liberties, and we're going to have 20-year occupations of Afghanistan and Iraq. And by the way, you're either with us or the terrorists if you don't adhere to that kind of doctrine. That's exactly what Israel's doing right now. Lots of parallels there.
Because they have been trying to figure out how to solve this Palestine question. And if you look at the history from after 67, they've always been looking for opportunities. When can we carry out the expulsion? And it seemed as if it couldn't happen.
Let me ask you, is the end game here the consolidation of U.S.-Israel power in the Middle East?
No. The end game is the same game from day one, from October 8th. It's the same game. One of the things I found very striking, I just read the UN Commission of Inquiry report, which chaired by Navi Pillay, in which they conclude that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And in order to demonstrate the claim, the allegation of genocide, you have to show intent, okay, that they intend. And they start citing all of the statements that were made by senior Israeli officials right after October 7th. And you know what was the most striking thing about that? They said, Israeli officials said, we're going to reduce Gaza to rubble. That's the word they used. We're going to reduce Gaza to rubble. There are no civilians in Gaza. Everybody is Hamas, and all those things. So what was the standard response back then?
That is genocidal language, by the way, and I hate to say that prominent U.S. politicians were in lockstep with that, with people like Brian Mast tweeting that there's no such thing as an innocent Palestinian. That's totally in line with Netanyahu and the right-wing Likudniks. It's in line with Randy Fine when someone on Twitter posted, hey, you know, here's a picture of a child being pulled up from the rubble dead because of Israel's atrocities, and saying, like, how can you sleep at night? And he's like, very fine, thank you. You know, pardon the pun, this is Randy Fine, but this is the vile attitude of neocon Zionists in the U.S. too. This is true. And you can find it from Israeli officials saying this sort of thing, like Smotrich and Israel Katz. This is right.
The standard response was, they said it in the heat of the moment. They were traumatized. They were shocked. They were indignant. But guess what? You know what happened in the next 2 years?
Same thing.
Exactly what they said.
Yeah.
They reduced Gaza to rubble. They didn't distinguish between combatants and civilians. They reduced the population not just to starvation, but to famine. At least a quarter of the population, right as we speak now, is living in famine conditions. They stuck hard and fast by what they said they were going to do on October 8th. They didn't, obviously, sometimes political constraints set in. That causes you to adjust your program,
Right.
but not
Fundamentally change
not
it.
abandon it.
Yeah, this is right. I mean, this was not heat of the moment stuff. It's stuff that, you know, you could have said that as an excuse. You know, we have to do all these atrocities, but that was heat of the moment. They don't actually mean that, but they did, it turns out, mean that. And many of them said that in their own words, to the point of you have Israel Katz talking about creating a concentration camp in the ruins where Rafah once stood, diminishing the aid stations from 400 to 4. Finkelstein's talked about that a lot. We know from the whistleblower Anthony Aguilar that's happened there. With IDF just taking shots at Palestinians lining up for aid there. This is what's happening now, and it wasn't heat of the moment. This was actually policy being drafted up and being executed in Gaza.
To change it, not to jettison it.
So then does this plan help with that? I mean, is there anything in this plan that gives even a modicum of relief to Palestinian people, given the starvation, given the lack of access to resources, everything we've seen for the last 2 years of genocide? Does the plan offer anything?
Well, that really depends on Trump. If they release the hostages, I think they'll probably, my guess would be there'll be a temporary period, like there was that ceasefire that lasted for 2 months. And then Israel will find an excuse, a pretext. It's not hard to fabricate pretext. Or it will simply say Hamas hasn't disarmed. We gave them a chance to disarm, and then they will resume where they left off, as they resumed on March 18th of this past year.
Totally agree. Until Gaza is Belgium, we're going to occupy it. That's going to be the Israeli mantra. They're going to say no matter what happens, Hamas didn't disarm. Not every last soldier did. And whatever pretext they want to use, they're going to continue their subjugation of the Palestinian people. In the West Bank, too, where they want to expand the settlements, and they're doing that while most of the attention is on Gaza. They're carving up parts of Syria and Lebanon and, wanting to destabilize the Iranian regime and draw the U.S. back into more war with Iran to do the same there. And this is all part of the Greater Israel Project. So I agree with him completely.
So there may be, I suppose, if Hamas releases the hostages, there may be a temporary period, but I don't say this with glee, and I don't say it because I'm stubborn. I say it because that's what the track record shows. Israel will not let go of this opportunity.
So
this is that godsend, and they will not let it pass.
many Israelis.
Yeah, I agree with him, and they're acting so erratically, I think, because they see the window of U.S. support for Israel come to a close. You see a time constraint there with younger people turning away from being willing to support Israel at all costs, where it's younger people just do not do that. You poll Americans in general, their sensibilities are shifting away from this Israel first mentality, and it's mostly with young people. Now, I know there's exceptions. There's lots of older people that watch my show and have the same opinions I generally do on this issue, and I commend them. But this is a demographic shift we have to pay attention to. So not only does Netanyahu want to take this opportunity to really subjugate the Palestinians even more than they have through the last 60 years and annex the territory, take the West Bank, and even carve up parts of Iran. And if you see those Greater Israel maps that Netanyahu has held up, it's potential on the table that he wants Sinai too, by the way. So that is why they're acting so erratically right now. They won't let this slip away, but I do want the hostages released, because that would take from the table the Israeli propaganda that says, hey, they haven't released our hostages yet. So that's why we need to do all of this madness, atrocities, and murder spree and starvation in Gaza. That would rob them from that talking point. I think that alone would be good, notwithstanding anything else.
Including some members of the Netanyahu government have rejected even this deal, and they seem to want to continue the genocide in full force.
They all want to continue it in full force.
What does it say about Israeli society?
I think the Israeli society, I've said it for many years, I think it's a lunatic society. People try to avoid that fact. If you take somebody like Bernie Sanders, he started off terrible the first couple of months on Gaza, and then he got quite good. I had very little problem with him except for one thing. He kept saying the problem is Netanyahu.
Right.
The problem is Netanyahu. That's not true. Even Netanyahu made the point in his UN speech. He says, everybody blames me for not wanting a Palestinian state, he said in the UN speech. But he said, you know what? He said, last week, he said there was a vote in the Knesset, whether you oppose or support a Palestinian state. He said there are 120 members of the Knesset. Do you know how many support the Palestinian state? He said,
9, I think.
9.
Yeah.
Over 90% agree with me.
Yeah, this is a great point. I think this is so true because so many people now just want Netanyahu to be the total scapegoat for all this policy, but that takes the culpability away from those complicit in this. It's, by the way, my government too. I hate to say it's embarrassing that my government bankrolls this, but it's also the members of the right-wing coalition that Netanyahu assembled in the run-up to his consolidation of power in Israel. It's Smotrich who said that he wants starvation to be the policy in Gaza. It's Israel Katz who says that, hey, we're going to build a concentration camp in Rafah. It's, Ben Gvir, one of the hardest core radical Zionist imaginable that support all this madness and propped up by a lot of the Israeli electorate and a lot of the Knesset, which is Israel's legislature. So this is so true. This would be wrong for people. And you see this on some of the conservative sides right now to pin all the blame on Netanyahu. But that just, prolongs this criminal system of laundering money from the U.S. populace to Israel. That even though Netanyahu goes away, that doesn't take off the table this mindset that's driving the atrocities in Gaza. I totally agree with him on this. This is fantastic.
The problem is not me. This is what we all agree on. That's true. Israeli society, a poll taken probably about 4 or 5 months ago now, showed that 47% of Israeli Jews, 47%, support a genocide in Gaza. It wasn't an ambiguous question. You said, well, genocide, can mean many things. No, they were asked a very simple question. When the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, when they enter a city, should they kill everybody in the city? That was literally the question that was posed to them. Should you kill everybody in the city? 47% said yes.
That's a stunning number.
That says everything you need to know. I mean, this is crazy and vile. It's just absurd, but it does seem to be the case. I looked at the question, it was that. And if you would have polled Americans the day after 9/11, by the way, I think they would have had a similar response. But this is 2 years after October 7th, too. And that mentality is generally maintained with U.S. politicians totally supportive of that logic and saying, like, hey, it's anti-Semitic if you call this a problem with their society and the way it operates and thinks. And, you're a Jew hater if you point this out. Well, Norman Finkelstein is a consummate Jew. He's the son of Holocaust survivors, and it doesn't exactly work to call him anti-Semitic, though they have tried to do that. They've tried to destroy his life over telling the truth about these sorts of things.
Then, a few weeks later, there was a question, because Israelis are the most polled people on earth. So a few weeks later, after that 47%, there was a question put to Israeli society in general. Are there any innocents in Gaza? Are there any innocents in Gaza? 62% said no. And then, if you factor out the 20% of Israelis who are not Jewish, it's a 70%.
Wow.
Say there are no innocents in Gaza from age 0 on up. No innocents in Gaza.
Yeah, unbelievable. Just highlighting the fact that they're literally going with a propaganda apparatus supporting the notion that, the dead children that are pulled up from the rubble in Gaza are not innocent. Those aren't innocents. Those are just Hamas. Those are Hamas, or they were human shields or collateral damage that we needed to kill to get to these bad guys. An excuse that would never fly in any moral society, wouldn't fly in the U.S. If in your community a criminal took 3 hostages into a school and they just dropped a bomb over the entire school knowing it would kill all 4. That's a criminal atrocity. That's premeditated murder, but for some reason Israel gets away with it, and there's no innocence in Gaza. Just a lunatic mindset. And 62% of the people polled in Israel under that representative group say that. This is a sickness. It's a sickness of a society. Does that mean I think there should be violence against the Israelis? No. I want the U.S. to get out of this madness. And supporting this vile criminal government in Israel with our tax dollars when Americans are suffering in many ways here under inflation. Go to the store and look at the price of beef compared to 4 years ago. look at how it's exploded. It's literally double, and this is when they're saying inflation something like 4% annually now. You know, it's just absurd. Americans know the difference. The CPI is being manipulated to take out certain, markets that are more inflationary than others, and to basically justify the loosening of interest rates. But we know what the catastrophe is from debt spending in Israel, in Ukraine, etc. It's lots of debt. It's lots of inflation because the central bank then prints more money to finance this, and Americans are left with the bill. That's what inflation is. It's a hidden tax on wealth holdings, and Americans can't afford gas and groceries and college tuition now because of all this. And we're supposed to just be fine with this mentality that we're just going to support Israel. But look, I hope this peace deal goes well. It just seems to me to put too much power in Israeli hands to interpret whether or not Hamas is acting in the ways that it's supposed to for all these stipulations to play out. And that's a big deal. Israel's not an impartial arbiter in this debate. Neither is the UN. Neither is the US. So to put all the impetus on Israel to have kind of a monopoly power on those interpretations, I think is a recipe for disaster. Now, we do hear Hamas saying that, hey, we're going to give up the hostages. We have some reservations about some other things here. I think rightfully so. But, I don't think Israel's going to let this opportunity slip away like Finkelstein. I think they're going to take any kind of, supposed provocation as a new propaganda campaign to stick it to the Palestinians, continue the ethnic cleansing, and that's where we're going to go. I hope I'm wrong. I so hope I'm wrong on this. But I think Finkelstein is right in so many regards here, and it just behooves us to understand why this policy is so destructive, why it's spilled over into domestic policy where, you're just an anti-Semite if you point these things out. And by the way, let's modify hate speech laws to conflate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism as they've done in several states. And by the way, let's limit hurricane and disaster relief to people that don't criticize Israel. That's happened under the Trump program. Let's try to deport people on the basis of whether they're critical of Israel, like Mahmoud Khalil, that episode proved. This is how it spills over and becomes a plague domestically as well. But let me know what you think. Is Norman Finkelstein right in the comments down below? Do you think Israel is going to continue the ethnic cleansing and basically use any excuse under the sun to do it? Or do you think this plan is going to work out? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks Al Jazeera English for having this interview. And Norman Finkelstein's a hero as far as I'm concerned. If you like this video, please click the join button below. You can support the channel. And by doing that, you'll get access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. And until next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.